Well, hello to everyone who's watching us today. I'm in Lawton, Oklahoma, just outside of Fort Sill, and I'm here with one of my old clients, a guy named Mac Vaughn. So he has an extraordinary story. There's some really interesting elements of it that touch on issues that relate to a lot of service members deal with. But his has some interesting wrinkles. So of all the clients I've wanted to have that tell their stories, Mac is one of the ones I've been most looking forward to. So, thank you so much for joining us here.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. And I was just speaking earlier. I said, "There's anyone that can tell my story better than me? It's this guy that's going to be interviewing me." So it's a pleasure to be here, James. Thanks for coming in and talking to me.
Yeah. So you grew up in Lawton, right?
Yes, I grew up here. I moved from Beatrice, Nebraska when I was in the second grade and grew up here in Lawton, Fort Sill, through my upbringing, and then graduated in 2008 and went to West Point.
So for anyone who's not familiar with Lawton, what is Lawton like?
I always call it like a town in a box. I mean, it's basically a lot of corporate chains. It's a very transient community. It's kind of a lot like a very milder version of Las Vegas. It's like there's nothing, that really drives a lot of people here besides transient reasons. And, so a lot of times the local businesses and stuff like that, they are here, but they're just not as diverse, and there's a lot more corporations and like corporate food chains and big stuff like that come in.
One thing that's weird to me, every time I come down here, and I lived here for about a couple of years back in the early part of the previous decade, but for the most part I'm here occasionally with cases I have.
Yeah.
Whether most of y'all know, if you don't, I'm a civilian attorney. I sometimes do military cases. That's where the bulk of my work is, military cases. So when I come down here, I'm come here, that may not be back there for 6 months. And every time I come down here, you never know what restaurants are going to be available. What businesses. It completely
you can fall in love with a restaurant and it's out of business within a month because
do you remember Rose's, that taco place? I still miss Rose's.
Yeah. And there was a hurricane, and they're actually, I think, a chain. Hurricane Wings. Have you heard of them? Yeah, they were out here for a little bit and they went under too. So I was just like, oh.
So it's always it's a weird place.
Yeah, it's very flux.
But so to me, it's so interesting that you grew up in a military community.
Correct.
And you decided to go into the military, go to West Point. Tell me a little bit about why you decided to go to West Point and that whole process.
I definitely have had a certain amount of cognitive dissonance at certain parts of my life, and I'll kind of explain what I mean by that. But initially when I was going to West Point, I was brought up very Republican. I had very traditional Christian based values, and ironically enough, it was my education at West Point through the philosophy training and curriculum that I was exposed to there, plus a wide variety of other curriculum that I had there at West Point, exposed me to different diverse ways of thinking that I had not really considered prior to that decision of joining West Point and then ultimately joining the military.
Okay. Now, your experience of getting into West Point, what was that like?
Very rigorous. I mean, I worked my butt off in high school. I definitely, had a very high GPA, and it was kind of like applying to school twice. I mean, you apply, unless you are a legacy, if your dad's like a colonel or something like that, you basically have to apply to West Point 2 times. Once to the school itself, which is this whole process in and of itself, and then there's the appointment from a congressman. So, there was the application process that I went through, and I was eventually nominated by Tom Cole, who's the representative 4th District here in Oklahoma, and Senator Inhofe, and I believe I had one from Senator Coburn as well. So and from all 3 of the major service academies, Air Force and Navy as well. So I really applied, to a variety of schools. I basically applied to some 20 different schools and had a lot of different opportunities offered to me. But having grown up in a military town, I definitely felt a certain affinity for the Army, and I wanted to see what that was about. And I was drawn towards it. And also my mentor in high school, I can't go without mentioning him, Doc Freeman. West Point grad himself, taught English at West Point, was the head of the English department for over 20 years at West Point, then decided to teach high school English, and I was one of his pupils.
Wow.
So I mean, having known his history and what he went through, and sort of idolizing him in a certain way, I said, well, I'll go to West Point too and see what this is all about.
Now, your plan after West Point was like, what was your? I mean, for the officers, do they call it MOSs or what do they?
We have MOSs. A lot of times though, you don't identify it as much as the enlisted people know it right off the bat. You know, I believe it was a 91 Alpha is what I was called, and that was a distribution platoon leader.
Okay.
And that was going to be my first permanent position out of what they call BOLIC, which is Basic Officership Leadership Course, and that's where the officers go after their commissioning source graduation, whether it be ROTC, OCS, which is where the enlisted guys go up in the rank, or generally speaking. But they could also go to ROTC or one of the major academies, or West Point, so that would be your 3 commissioning sources for the Army.
So could you tell us a little bit as far as what your experiences at West Point were like? Because what I recall from your case, and this was a few years back, was that you had an incredibly good education in many ways.
Yes, I did, and it was very diverse, and it was also one that really forced you to open your eyes to different ways of thinking, because you had to take classes that I would have otherwise never took. You know what I mean? I'm talking chemistry, physics, stats, calculus 1 and 2, a systems engineering track. So I took 3 semesters of systems engineering, which is basically what would be a minor, in most schools. So, everyone has at least a minor in some form of engineering upon graduation from West Point. But
what was do you have a major?
My major was philosophy, but I only took 8 courses related to philosophy because everything else was chosen for me. And also, chosen what time you take it. So I was taking physics at 7:30 in the morning for a whole year.
Oh, wow.
that was
the advantage of the Army, I guess. They can, that regular college, it's really hard to get people to sign up for the 7:30.
Right. Yeah. There was no choosing the time to take it. There was no choice. It was use your schedule unless you have some kind of, real mitigating circumstance. This is it, and you're sticking to it.
So what was student life like?
I would say, very, especially during the grade period, pretty dull. I mean, and it's also very strenuous in a way. I guess it's dull, but it's weighing on you. It's almost kind of like living in pain in a way, because it's just everything is very bleak and gray. Anyone that has that sad, what do they call it, the seasonal affective disorder, if you have that, West Point is not where you want to be during the winter, because it is just everything's gray. Your uniform is gray. Your attitude is gray. So it was definitely some tough times, but it was also a lot of rewarding times. I mean, I learned, it's kind of like a leadership laboratory. You definitely learn different ways of dealing with people and trying to, get things done effectively. You see what not to do, and you definitely see, good ways of, and effective ways of leading too. And so, my biggest takeaway from West Point was learning, better ways of managing and effectively leading, people. And that's what drew me to the Army as well too, is that it's more people-oriented than it is a lot of the other branches.
Well, I think one of the things in your story that stands out to me, and this is kind of there's positives and negatives, but was in your chance of moving into leadership while at West Point, but also some of the hard things that came. Do you want to share just a little bit about that?
So, one experience that I had at West Point that was definitely, not the norm by any means, was when I was going into a company command position as a cadet. They call it a cadet company commander. There's not very many people that ever reach that rank. Just, you could even graduate all 4 years there and have never had a detail like this. This was kind of thrusted upon me by we call them TAC officers, and they're like actual Army people that have been out and have served and are coming back to mentor cadets. And I had a soldier die under my command from heat exhaustion when I was going into my first year, senior year there at West Point.
And this was really early in the season, wasn't it?
Yeah. This was actually in the summer. This
was
during the brutal heat. It was 114-degree heat index, and we were still training out in the woods. And they don't actually do this exercise anymore because of what happened in 2011. And I was in charge of the cadet, one of 180 cadets that were in my custody in a sense. And I felt I still feel a tinge of survivor's guilt over that incident. It definitely impacted me in a very meaningful way. I think ultimately weighed into part of my other decision making that later followed. And we'll get into that. But I think it effectively, in the way I see it now, it was a traumatic event. It triggered my underlying what I didn't know I had, bipolar. you know, but I now know I have that diagnosis. I mean, go into how that came about, but, you know, the PTSD as well. And the PTSD came, and it's, even though I never deployed, it is actually deemed service connected, what I experienced because of the reporting and the way that we handled that incident. It really traumatized me in a way where I was very resistant to being put in a situation where I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel adequately trained.
What year school was that?
That was 2011.
Okay,
So I was going into my senior year, first year. Yeah.
Okay. Well, to me, that incident is so significant because before long, as a new officer, you're going to be a lieutenant, before long a captain, which means you're going to be back in a company commander position before long.
Correct.
And so it's very unusual for someone to have had that level of responsibility as a cadet, and then for something, a tragedy like that to happen, it's you went through a lot. For sure.
Yeah.
So I know that last year or so, if your time at West Point, you had that incident, but also just it seems like there was a lot that the wear of the whole thing was really affecting you then.
I was becoming increasingly disillusioned at the academy, especially going into I think a lot of it was just my studies in philosophy. I mean, being exposed to anarchical reigns of thought, or you know, anything that I really enjoyed reading it, but there's a lot of critiques foreign policy wise about what America's been doing for, you know, over decades now. We now have one of the longest wars in our history. It is the longest war in our history, if I remember right. And it doesn't impact a lot of people. You know, I mean, day to day,
very small percentage.
Right. It's less than 1% last time I remember looking at that. You know, it's that even have any, you know, real connection to what it is to have to serve and experience these wars of profit, in my opinion, that we are, you know, engaging in abroad, and it, you know, the exploitation too of, you know, third world countries and people that are hurting, you know, the exploitation of those individuals as well through our war efforts is something that I was reckoning with a lot as a young officer. And I definitely wanted to have, you know, answers for soldiers that were asking me these tough questions, because I know if I'm wondering these things, I'm probably not the only one.
Oh, of course.
You know, thinking this kind of way. But you know, and going in, I mean, after, let's just say, you know, after graduation from West Point, where I went, I mean, I went, did everything as normal as possible. You know, went to the basic officership leadership course out in Virginia, was trained to become an ordnance officer. And then when I get to my first
this is like
unit,
this is after
West Point, right?
Okay.
You know, and I get to my first unit, and it's you know, this support battalion out in Fort Riley, Kansas. And I thought, you know, naive me, that being an ordnance trained officer, I'm going to be put in an ordnance company. Yeah. No, I'm putting in a transportation company. And I'm going to be the distribution platoon leader. And I had no prior experience of training on how to handle that, or what the op orders look like, or what is it like running convoy ops, what kind of strategic decision making do I need to be considering if we're ever attacked in a vulnerable chain of 2 miles long worth of logistics. Wow. You know, I did not want that responsibility. It was my least choice of branch coming out of the academy. And so when I knew that I was ultimately going to become transportation, even though I was trained ordnance, that was also played a factor into why I felt the need to basically do what I did to escape a very precarious situation. And I also didn't want to put anyone else in harm's way. I didn't want to hurt, you know, any of the other soldiers that were going to be in my custody, having already had one die, knowing what that felt like. You know, I didn't want to put anyone else's lives at risk because of my own ignorance. I'm assuming, I would assume what would be so hard as a new officer would be too, you probably would have had senior NCOs who had more experience than you. And yet you're in this leadership position over them. That would be really unnerving. What was the most unnerving part about that, though, was when I had the first conversation with my platoon sergeant, and I was expecting this to be, you know, her very informative, telling me, you know, personnel-wise, what it's like to daily run convoy operations. And when I asked her, you know, and basically even kind of revealed to her that be vulnerable and say, I'm not trained in this. Could you help me understand a little bit more about convoy operations and what it looks like from my end? So that's your lane. I don't know anything about it. So, I mean, this is somebody that's been doing convoy operations for 20 plus years and doesn't know a thing about it, can't articulate what that looks like to me. And whether that's genuine or not, it's concerning, you know? And so, I mean, this is the kind of backlash that I was getting. This was even before I did what I did, which instead of just, you know, brushing over the elephant in the room, I went AWOL, and it's something that is haunted me for a long time. It's not something that when I usually meet people, I don't go, "Hi, I'm Mac. I went AWOL." It's definitely
and
not,
especially as an officer.
Exactly. And
I mean, there's a lot of enlisted people that go AWOL.
Right.
Pretty rare, officers.
Right, for officers to do that, and it was something that was definitely frowned upon in my community, and it makes me feel like I'm probably not welcome back in the next West Point event. But I did what I did, and I think a lot of it played a role, though, in as far as knowing my story, what happened, and what was going on in my mind during that time. I think a lot of people can find similarities with, and being put in positions where they don't quite feel well equipped, or that not necessarily that they care about themselves so much and themselves getting hurt, but these other people that could get hurt because of me. And that was what I was trying to avoid for the most part, was getting myself in a situation in any way, and that's where people have to remember. I mean, you yourself are in control of your own actions. I mean, you really can't blame it on somebody else. I mean, the Nazis were all following orders. I mean, you can't just,
we all have to make choices.
Right, you all have to make choices, and it's a daily routine, and it's something that you don't want to just continuously make the same choice if it's negatively impacting your life. Yeah. And that was where I decided, even though, yes, it was breaking the law, yes, it was something that's frowned upon, and rightfully so, in the military community. I can definitely understand, you wouldn't want everybody just jumping ship and leaving you. But I think that there's definitely a conversation that could be had, too, in this country about the necessity of some of these more barbaric clauses in the UCMJ. And I don't mean any offense by using that term, but I think that is something that, in the UCMJ, there is definitely certain legislation that negatively impacts soldiers, and especially those that want to continue the mission. I think, if you have a soldier that is unable or unwilling to do his duties or her duties, that soldier should be allowed to have the state of mind to leave and not face legal recourse. Yeah. The system, the way it's currently set up, reminds me a lot of like indentured servitude in a way. In a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, to me, what really strikes me in the current system is that I can kind of respect the idea of civil penalties, that they're being repayment in some limited cases, sort of restitution.
But I can't see being a criminal issue.
Right.
I have family who've been public school teachers for many years, and one time my mom had to leave a year, midway through a year, and that was a big deal. And her school wouldn't let her have her contract. Well, they didn't put her in jail because she could keep her contract. They just they suspended her teaching license for 6 months, so she couldn't teach anywhere else till the end of the year. That was it, because it was just a civil issue. It wasn't a criminal. This wasn't a crime. It's just you can't.
And in many
other won't work.
Right. And in many other countries in the world, what I had done wouldn't have been a crime. And I talked when I was traveling. I met a Finnish Army sergeant, and I shared with him my story. And he goes, "That is so weird, because in my country, you would just be out of a job."
Yeah.
And they'd say, "Yeah, I mean, if we had paid for your education, blah, 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 right, you'd have that conversation, but you wouldn't be facing criminal charges."
Yeah. I mean,
and not even. Let's be also clear. It's not just criminal; it's capital charges.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
this is a capital offense on the books in the UCMJ. I mean, it's a capital offense.
I mean, and if you read the story, and I'll later on the webcast, I'll put a link there to the story of the one person who's executed during World War II for desertion. But it was extremely unjust when you read this whole story. But yet it's still in the books, and the question is why. Well, I think one thing I was going to mention too in your story, and again, what I'm so fascinated by in your story is that your story in some ways is unique, in other ways it is very not unique, because I was thinking about what you described, the fear you had of what would happen if you didn't do your job right.
Right.
And I have heard many of my clients tell me the same thing. I think I would guess at least a quarter of my clients on absence-related offenses, the reason they go AWOL is they fear that if they are deployed, and that if they can't pull the trigger, if they can't fulfill their mission, someone else will get hurt.
Yeah.
And absolutely. I've heard that over and over again. And a lot of times, I think the military frames this as if people that go AWOL, they're doing it, they're disrespecting. Out of
cowardice.
Out of cowardice, or it's disrespect for the unit. And often it's the exact opposite. I've had many who have told me that it'd be easier for me to stay and just obey orders. But I fear that I can't do what I have to do. And
Right.
that every person in this unit is critical. And if I go on this deployment, bad things will happen. And
Right.
I've heard that so many times.
Absolutely. And and if you feel ultimately, like I was indicating earlier, if you feel ultimately that you cannot do what is being asked of you, I would think even the military would agree that is not someone that is going to be cohesive to the unit, is going to do it's going to be helping us with our mission, is going to get the mission accomplished. That's not a mission ready unit. And and I inherited a mess. I mean, when I became a platoon leader of this distro platoon, I think it was less than maybe 5 to 10% of my entire unit that was physically fit and ready to deploy.
Oh,
and
wow.
we were deploying in less than a month. So I mean, we had close to 20 to 25 people that weren't even physically fit in my unit and willing and ready to participate in combat, which, and again, I mean, the situation and the scenarios that I was having to just impromptu wise understand and be ready for, to act on a moment's notice, is something that I didn't receive training for. I received training for an entirely different function, something that was going to be much more, I don't know what the word, passive, and it was really much more about maintaining vehicles and maintaining readiness, on the FOB, which is the Forward Operating Base, if you're thinking about Army, maneuverings or whatever. But, I was expecting something a lot less than, or a lot different than what I was in, and that, isn't the only reason I went AWOL, but it was definitely played a big part, and not. Like you said, not being able to have faith in yourself that you are going to do what you need to do to protect the guy or girl next to you also played a big factor. And I think that that's something that's largely ignored even in the military community. And I think it's something that, we're quick to dismiss people that go AWOL as POS or, somebody that's just, dogging on the unit. But that's not usually the case at all. And it's usually somebody that's probably needing some help. And in my case, that's definitely what it was. I had a mental health undiagnosed that was being exacerbated by medication that was.
Well, let's back up a second.
Sure,
we're bringing folks to
right.
kind of so you had, after West Point, you graduated. Did you start having, when did you start noticing you had mental health issues?
I was noticing it after that traumatic event at West Point when that soldier died. So that was roughly 2011. It was July 21st, 2011. After that event, I had to treat it like, there's a general to treat it like war, and we just kept going, did the training, got through it, got about 8 weeks later, I finally get some training, or some counseling. Plenty of training, I needed some counseling. So I get some counseling.
So you said 8 weeks later? 8
weeks later.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I can just throw this out there,
right.
that there's very solid evidence when it comes to PTSD. If you treat it quickly, the chances of it being an issue is much less. If you wait a while, it's often much more difficult to treat.
Right.
And the
also,
Army knows this, by the way. This isn't any big secret.
Well, and that's true too. And so, the thing was it was a command decision made by people above me that were keeping me mission focused and mission oriented during a time when I didn't need to be. What I needed to be, and what most of everybody in my unit needed, was counseling, grieving, some therapies, some downtime to reflect on what just happened and realize that they're okay.
Yeah.
Everybody was freaking out, and I became the scapegoat for a lot of people because they're blaming me for us having to continue the training, and I'm trying to express to them, hey, this isn't my decision to make either.
Yeah.
This was, I never got a conversation that said, it was pretty one-sided. It wasn't, hey, are you okay, or is there any way I can help you? It was none of those types of questions. It was, are you going to be ready to Charlie Mike? Are you going to be ready to continue mission? Are you going to be ready to keep this unit going and get them through this detail, which I ultimately did.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, I felt like an 80-year-old man. I mean, I was totally exhausted. I was fatigued to the bone. My cheeks were sunken in. I hadn't eaten much. I hadn't slept but maybe 30 to 40 minutes on average a night. I wasn't myself, and really never got the proper care that I needed until, unfortunately, I had this separating event. I went AWOL, and I went to Argentina. I went so far away, and it was so drastic and so uncharacteristic of anything that I'd done previously.
Sure.
That I'd hope they would say, okay, well, something's obviously up. This guy's just got some mental something that we need to get addressed. But instead, I was met with nothing but resistance and aversion and discipline actions.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that. I want to kind of build the story a little bit.
Sure.
So during time at West Point, you got some counseling, but not really at the right time and not enough. And then after West Point, you went to Fort Lee, was it?
Yeah, Fort Lee, Virginia.
And then there, did you get more mental health care?
I was getting some care there too. I forgot to mention that I had joined up, and I self-admitted myself to the Army substance abuse program. I had been drinking a lot of booze, and especially in the morning even. I mean, just like all the time by myself with people. I didn't care. I like being drunk because it helped me kind of forget, like what was happening. So,
and by the way, that's a very common thing for combat veterans. I mean, what strikes me is you were having symptoms much like a combat veteran would. You'd never deploy.
I never deployed.
But you'd had that kind of loss, that kind of trauma.
Right. And I'm quick to say too, I mean, there are definitely people that have post-traumatic stress disorder that have it a lot worse than me. I do have infrequent nightmares, but I have medication and things help me to get past that. And I'm aware more of my triggers, and I'm still working with therapy to kind of get, better with it. But I still have it, and it's still something that affects me daily. And it's something that, I still have aversion to large crowds. I have aversion to, certain loud noises or things that many combat veterans also experience. But even though I had never been in combat, and that's something that I struggle with too. Like, I mean, just the stigma associated with like, okay, well, what is, how do you really have PTSD? Is it really, or is this just something you're making up? And promise you, it's not something I'm making up. I mean, it's definitely something that's very real to me.
So after Fort Lee, you self-admitted, you started getting some treatment there. Now, as I recall, when did they give you the medicine on the smoking medicine?
They started that at West Point. So
you got help for smoking.
Yes.
They gave you a medicine we later discovered was contraindicated for someone who is bipolar.
Correct.
Now, I will say this, in the Army's defense, at that moment in time, it was not clear you were bipolar.
Right.
On the other hand, I would say, from my perspective as a lawyer who's dealt with a lot of this stuff, that they should have, the first question you would do before you give someone a medicine that is contraindicated for bipolar disorder, and someone who is depressed, who's having, you would first want to rule out making sure this person isn't bipolar.
Right.
You would do testing. You might start with, if you were going to try medication, you start with a very low dose to see what the reaction was. And I'm assuming there was none of that.
Well, and there was not even a screen for the condition that is in my family, which is bipolar disorder. There was no screening for that. There's no indication of them even having an interest on whether I have a family history of a mental health.
So that they were never asked questions about that at all. And then when you got to your first Fort Lee, you did your training, you came to Fort Riley, your first duty station as a new officer.
Correct.
And now you're thrown into the situation very, very quickly, a deployment coming. You're in a job specialty that you were not trained for. And then what mental health care did you seek at that point?
I was still seeking counseling, and I had been I was just trying to sort of reestablish care, and a lot of the other problem, and there's nothing really the Army can do about this either. It's just I'm being shuffled around 3 different places within a year, and it's hard to get any
But
real.
That's what the internet is for.
Right, true. I mean, and these days now, you're right. I mean, they should be able to just do it, and they are starting to do this more. As a matter of fact, I meet with my psychiatrist currently, and we meet over webcam, but I go to the Lawton office, I sit in a room, and they put her on webcam, and she's at her home in Oklahoma City. And I'm
really,
but I have to be in the room with it. So I'm like, why can't they just let me do this over at my house? Put on my PJs too. Like she knows more coffee than me. But no, but I think it's great. I'm glad. And it's encouraging to see those advances in medicine. At this point, there definitely was none of that going on, and there was also just, and I don't know if to my knowledge, Army medicine hasn't gotten much better, but the Army medicine stuff, there's just a certain notion that you may not get the best care in the Army. They aren't always known for having the best doctors.
Well, and there's certainly too, that's a whole big issue, because often what we've discovered is that there's cases of doctors actually being disciplined by civilian licensing boards, and then the military hires them. And the VA hires them. This is a real problem. But I think also in your case, again, when you got to Riley, your first duty station, pretty quickly and I guess was this prescribed for the Wellbutrin?
Wellbutrin, and then and after I'd come back, and there was. Okay,
let's not jump to
that. So where are we talking? We want to talk about.
Well, right now we're at Fort Riley.
Fort Riley. Okay.
So Fort Riley. You're continuing counseling. That was when they started you on Wellbutrin, was it, Riley?
I was on Wellbutrin, which otherwise known as Zyban.
That's right. It's the same drug. Drug, okay.
Propion.
Okay, so you've been on that for a while. But the problem is this is a drug. It's contraindicated, which means that for someone who's bipolar, it causes major problems. And for someone who's not familiar, and I'll give you my layman's perspective, and you tell me how accurate or inaccurate I am here. My understanding of bipolar disorder is it's often this cycling process between times of manic and depression. And a lot of people, I think, I was confused about this really until I got to know you and other cases like yours, that the manic isn't necessarily good feelings. It may be more of an agitated state. It may be more of we
call it a mixed state.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you have those mixed states, especially in bipolar 1, which is the more severe of the two diagnoses, the two labels that they have, 1 and 2. 2 is hypomania. So you're a lot more productive. You're able to, really, a lot of times they don't want that to go away. They like their hypomania. And a lot of times bipolar 2 patients, that's why they're very resistant to medications. So they don't want to have that hypomania go away. On the other hand, for me, I'm bipolar 1, so I have full-blown mania, and it's like almost like hypermania. There are times where that has been problematic for me, and definitely with the proper medication and talking with doctors and being able to find something that works, I'm now at a much better state where I'm able to view things very logically and very passively and have a more objective standpoint. But until that cocktail of medication was good in my system, there have been multiple times where I have been in either a mixed state or a manic state or an agitated type, angry, sad, but with a lot of energy type state that'll make me do things that are uncharacteristic.
Yeah. Well, what was striking in your case was, and I got to read a lot of the police reports and whatnot, because basically as when you reached that place, could you describe just a little bit of like your decision when you left? What was your experience like? And then I'll kind of tell you from the outsider perspective what I understand about it.
When I was leaving, it was a lot like watching me live out my life, like from a distance. And a lot of people say, well, you're dissociated. Yes, that's in a sense, yes. It felt very dissociated. I was not really in control of what I was doing, but this seemed like the only thing that I could do at the time because I was in such a painful, emotionally distraught type of way. But I was also not thinking clearly. I mean, it's evidenced by the way that I packed and what was left behind and what was brought with me. I mean, I brought my library, like maybe 2 changes of clothes. I left all my toiletries, and my valuable computers, all that stuff. Just left all that. Didn't even wonder where it was going to be. Thankfully my parents would pick it up for me later on. Which, they'll tell you all about that. It was out in the blizzard cold. I mean, they're going out.
Or like you left your car at the airport.
I left my car at the airport. Wasn't planning on getting it back anytime soon. So, I was not really thinking. Like, it wasn't a meticulously well laid out plan. It wasn't like, I had been plotting this escape for years or something, which is what the Army would try to paint it as. For a while when I came back, was like, he was a calculating, cold,
the investigative
AWOL
reports.
It was great. I mean,
and also just a cautionary tale, I will say, for anyone who's in any kind of legal precarious situation.
Don't do what I did.
Well, don't do that. But also
talk to this man.
But also be very careful about social media.
Yes.
Because
absolutely.
we learned later there was an MP who was posing as someone else,
Correct.
who was getting you to talk about your situation.
Amy Breyer was what her pseudonym was. Yeah, and I mean, she had a blonde hair. Seemed very charming. From Vail, Colorado. Just wanted to message.
I've seen her picture. She looked cute.
It was really out of the blue. And I'm like, well, and she had multiple pictures. I mean, this wasn't just like a hack job. They really went out of their way. She had multiple friends. Different things, and found out by transcript that in our case that they had been trying to incriminate me and entrap me.
And I'll just throw out there, by the way, what the Army did here was straight up illegal. Violated the terms of service of Facebook. It's straight up illegal. But they do this all the time, and law enforcement does this all the time.
Right.
So just
even my trial lawyer, JAG attorney that the Army gave me, looked at the file. I was like, dude, none of this is admissible, and I can't believe they even did it. But it's true. I mean, they really did do it.
But they were so paranoid. They were
convinced based on my security clearance and other things that I could have been divulging state secrets, which I promise I didn't do. For NSA or anyone who's listening. But I was just seeking healing, and I was trying to find, in a lot of sense, the antithesis of the Army, which ended up being a band of Hare Krishnas about 50 kilometers south Buenos Aires.
So why Buenos Aires?
Like I said, a lot of this was haphazard, but I had ran across, I was looking at, because I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to at least figure out, if you're going to go AWOL, you don't want to go somewhere where they can just grab you. And that's pretty much anywhere in America. I mean, it's true. Anywhere in America, if you go AWOL, I mean, they're going to contact your parents first. If you're there, well, you're definitely on the short bus right back. You're going right back. I mean, so it's not, but in my mind, I mean, I just had a lot of factors going through it at that time, and a lot of it wasn't all based either. But the biggest thing in my mind was I need to find a place to escape. And I ran across an Ask Men article that said, top 10 countries to escape from the U.S. government. And no shit, they had a list of 10 different ones. Argentina was maybe 3 or 4 on the list. I said, Argentina sounds pretty nice. It's kind of Europeanized. I've heard, they've got a lot of going on down there. And I'll be honest, I had a very pleasant time. There was definitely nothing.
So you literally got on a plane at Kansas City.
Correct. And went to Dallas. And then during the whole time, I was kind of journaling, and I made sure to not bring that journal with me when I came back because I didn't want to confiscate it. Because I was really writing, my thoughts and what was going on. I didn't want that used against me, and I still have some uneasiness about sharing all this just so openly.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
But knowing where I am now, I mean, it's great that I, came out of this relatively unscathed. Yeah, it is.
So to me, it was interesting when you got down there. I mean, one was finding this Hare Krishna community, and it seems like, and I've read up at the time. I looked into them a little bit because I was figure out where in the world were you?
Right.
Because I'll mention I got a call from, I think it was your dad, maybe dad or mom, who hired me, and they said, and my understanding was that how they described it is that it was almost like you kind of came to down there.
Yeah, I did.
It reminded me almost
about 4 days later.
Yeah,
I kind of was like, this isn't right. I probably shouldn't be here. This probably wasn't the best decision.
It actually reminded me a lot of a story I remember hearing growing up in a church setting about the story of the prodigal son, and he's finally at the pig trough, and he comes to it and realizes I can be back home. That's what I was thinking at the time. That's what it felt like. Right. But so you started corresponding, communicating with your family back home. Meanwhile, you're also mentioned you're still talking to a girl on Facebook.
Right.
Talking to her.
Yeah, I've been talking to her, yeah.
Yeah,
I thought she was right, yeah. And again, not using my best decision making. And if anything, it just proves, I think, even more so. I mean, really, ironically, what the Army and a lot of their case building did was just prove my case even more.
Absolutely.
That, this is not someone that is thinking rationally. This is not
made
somebody
it very
that is
painfully clear that
right,
you were in a different state of mind.
Right.
But so when you got down there, it was a good healing place for a time, it seemed.
It was. And I mean, they taught me yoga, meditation. I was able to very open up and tell them a lot of what I was doing and why I was here. And they identified with my plight. And I was met with open arms. I mean, I think, travel will do people a lot of good. And usually in any traveling that I've done, I've always walked away with something that's really just untangible. I mean, it's an experience, and it's a way of conditioning your perspective, finding new ways of thinking that even education tries to reach, but I don't think does it as good as travel can do.
Well, one thing I was actually, about your case, I always found interesting later was because you, prior to this, while you were at West Point, you traveled a lot when you had school breaks.
Yeah.
And so I always thought at the time it made sense to me, and it still does now, that it made sense that travel was something you found meaning in.
That's true too, and I should have. Right.
And so it made sense that you would do that again.
Absolutely. Totally, to my parents, I mean, absolutely. This made sense that this is what Mac would do. But it's not something, and even my parents would say, it's not something that I was plotting. It was not something that was like.
No, you would have packed a course for you here.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, why struggle through 4 years at West Point just to up and leave? I mean, I don't. That was to me that makes no sense. But if somebody wants to think that's what I did, more power to you. But,
So from a legal standpoint, here's the problem. And very quickly, and I know initially, I think before I got involved in the case, I know there's communication with the U.S. authorities. You talked about should you turn yourself in at the U.S. Embassy, and they said, we
can't touch it.
We can't do anything with this.
Yeah.
So the problem we had was I was concerned with someone with mental health issues. I didn't want you sitting in a county jail. My fear was if you flew into the U.S. or crossed the border, then you'd be thrown in a county jail and sitting there for weeks for the Army.
Absolutely. And this was during the holiday season too. So, this was like right around into Christmas, beginning of New Year, and there's just a lot, there was
a lot of concern.
Yeah.
But we also wanted to get you back as quickly as possible because we felt like that we knew in officer cases that odds of prosecution are very high. This is not going to be swept under the rug. We had a lot of fear here. So the concern was we wanted to try to get you as close to Fort Riley as possible. And we wanted your first step on U.S. soil to be close by.
Which was Kansas City. And you were the godsend for this. Because my first attorney was flying to Dallas. I'm like, I'm not flying into Dallas.
No. You'd be in the county jail in Dallas. And you don't want to be in the county jail in Dallas.
Right.
You only can anywhere, but I would say Texas county jails are among the worst.
Right.
But what we did was, I think you flew Buenos Aires to, where'd you fly?
San Jose, Costa Rica, if I remember, and then Cancun, Mexico, which is where I thought it could have been picked up in Cancun, but wasn't. Yeah, spent the night there, then flew into Kansas City from Cancun directly. And then they arrested me on board the aircraft.
Oh, yeah. I remember the government tell you, like, okay, we're going to stay seated except this one guy.
Right, yeah. No, actually, they really did. They said, no shit, man. Everybody stay seated. There's, excuse us, ladies and gentlemen, customs reporting the aircraft, and they get on board this flight, and I mean, I was sitting next to an elderly couple. I just shared some stories of my, travels with them and stuff, and they had no idea that they're sitting next to, like, number one, public enemy number one. I mean, it was crazy because my mom said, because my mom and dad were in the airport, my mom said she overheard some little girl ask her mom, Mommy, what did that guy do? And her mom, well, it was great. It was even better. Her mom's response was, I don't know, probably drugs. So, it definitely had created quite the uproar, especially for a small town like Indentured. That made those customs agents' day. I mean, they were trying every way they could. I mean, I remember one of them said to me, "Oh, way to double knot your shoes, Bond, real cute." They're like searching me and all my stuff. I was like, I don't want to become untied. I mean, what is that? Like, you're gonna make fun of my double knotted shoe? Jeez, that's kind of, you're really grasping for straws there, right?
So pretty quickly.
Oh, I feel so horrible.
So pretty quickly, the MPs, did they take you from Kansas City? Or
yeah, well, actually, my whole unit, my chain of command came to the airport. I think it was the XO, her social major, and she came, and my company commander, a couple others, and they all came and got me. And
I will say,
they were actually surprisingly more kind at first than I thought they were going to be. I mean, like, I thought I was going to be, like, cuffed, like, you're in the brig, like, I mean, and they were actually a lot. I had to give them some credit, not a whole lot, because they still messaged me a lot, and I was definitely still the pariah of, like, the whole, post at that point.
Well, what did help was that we had communicated with them. We told them exactly what flight you were getting in. So all of that, I think, helped immensely.
Right. And I had a letter from you, but they ripped that up. I mean, I have a letter from coming out this airplane. They wrenched my arm behind me, tied me to arrested me, handcuffed me to a bench, and they thought the funniest thing too, besides the shoes. Yeah, you familiar with latte tea? Okay, so it's like a green kind of leaf tea. Well, they thought that was marijuana. So they thought I was trying to. I mean, like, I'm knowingly turning myself into military control, and I'm bringing a whole bag of weed with me. I mean, how desperate do you think I am? I mean, like, come on,
you want to guarantee your
right? I mean, if I'm going out in style, I guess. But man, I was like, no, that's latte tea, and they were like, is this your pipe? I was like, no, that's a straw. It's a metal straw. I was like, have you ever smoked weed? I mean, how would you smoke weed out of that? I mean, can you explain that to me? And they're like, oh, you're trying to get cute on. I definitely didn't help my case there. But, I mean, I was like, you can test that all you want. I promise you won't find any THC in it. So.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So you got back to Riley. Of course, now the struggle is on. And how long were you back at Riley?
I was at Riley for a good 6 months following that event. And so I got out in about June of 2013.
So that whole time period, it was a pretty difficult situation because, one, we were trying to get you medically stabilized,
which was the hardest part in and of itself, and we can go into that a little bit. But
go for it.
The command team was very resistant to getting me any kind of mental health services at all. I was at the hospital, and this is what I think really helped my case ultimately with getting my discharge upgraded in an appellate process. Was noticing that the Army commander of the hospital put out a directive that if this man isn't admitted to a psych ward, he needs to be under 24-hour guard watch. I was never placed under 24-hour guard watch. I was put in the bachelor officer quarters, BOQs, and I was told to sign in every 4 hours by driving to the HQ and writing in my name and reporting. So there's a lot that was going on there that, I mean, they didn't follow their protocol. They were trying very desperately. So, I mean, there was the very first few days when I came back, my assigned duty was being in an empty room, sitting at a desk, staring at a wall for 8 hours, and then being dismissed to go home. Like, that was what I did for the first about a week.
Yeah. And there's no way in the world that is appropriate
punishment.
Not appropriate punishment is also not appropriate treatment. I mean, someone with mental health issues, having to stare at a wall, that's almost a guaranteed way to make them more nice.
To make them more nice. And that's what I'm saying, is they were going out of their way systemically to make me more nice and to try to make me do something that they could further punish me for.
Well, I recall you were also restricted to post.
I was restricted to post. I was restricted further to the battalion footprint, which was really just this small area of posts. I was really just restricted to that.
And that was one of the things throughout this we kind of pushed back on, is arguing that this really is illegal pretrial punishment.
Correct.
Because of that level of restriction. And just for anyone who's not familiar with the military culture and familiar with the military posts, they are soulless, soul-crushing places. I mean, it's just not, I mean, it's a really difficult place. And I think even for people who go there every day to do their job, it's not a place that's for you to be there 24/7 for the time. It's just a difficult thing. So you're very isolated.
It's hard to compartmentalize at that point, because now everything is, entirely, that your duty or whatever your assigned occupation is. But and it was the biggest struggle though for me with that was the way the command team was treating me, and the only way that I was eventually able to get admitted to a psych ward was having to go into the Army hospital, crying my eyes out, saying, I'm going to kill myself. And at that point, I was finally able to get admitted to a civilian hospital where they diagnosed me finally with the bipolar. Up to that point, and there was months. This was months that I had been back after being AWOL. Months had gone by, and I still had not had any proper medical treatment or care, and surprisingly didn't do anything to further exacerbate my situation. I kept threatening I was going to, but I never
was a wonder it didn't go much
worse. Right.
Well, in the end, as I recall, and again, this was quite a while, this is 2011, but as I recall, they were going to court-martial you. They were going for blood. Initially, they were not wanting any kind of deals. They were, and finally, what they agreed to after a long, long struggle, and as I recall, the biggie was just, we were going to embarrass them pretty bad on the mental health side, was they agreed to, was it resignation in lieu of court-martial?
Yes.
So could you tell folks who aren't familiar with that, what that looks like?
Well, in my case, at least, it was, court-martial is what you're supposed to fear the most, and so by them giving me this option, it was really my only way out to avoid, being like served a hard military prison sentence or, worse.
And by the way, I would just mention this was not an unreasonable fear. I know of officers who are doing hard time for adultery, literally cheating on their wife. They're doing months, even a year in prison for something like that. And so for desertion, going to Argentina, I mean, we went into this having some very realistic fears where you could be years in prison.
Absolutely. And, that was part of my qualm with even coming back in the beginning was, well, guys, I mean, I'm here now. I can just go between Argentina and Chile the rest of my life. You can come visit me. But, that was my initial thought. I'm not going to lie. Because, at this point, I had done what I did. And it's like, I'm probably just going to have to revoke my citizenship and do something different. But, thankfully I didn't do that, and I was able to listen to the calmer, cooler heads. And thankfully too, as I said, the Army and the VA and the whole situation, thankfully I was able to find some kinder people that were able to look at my case and say, this was obviously an injustice. This is something that, he was just thrusted into this horrible situation, and it was really just something that wasn't a lot of it in his control. And I think that finally was able to be kind of voiced to these, people that it really, and I mean, in the Army's own words, it wasn't injustice. I mean, it was something that, yes, I did these things. I'm not debating that I, went AWOL to Argentina, but there definitely was some mitigating factors than just, me ultimately just going, oh yeah, let's just go to Argentina and not tell anybody.
So then after that, I mean, to me, before we get to the next part of the legal journey, was now you're having to reboot your life. I mean, you had a career plan, and now you're going to do something completely different. So you're rebooting your life. You're also getting your mental health situation straight. And bipolar disorder is not an easy thing.
No, it's not. And it's also one that can always rear its ugly head even when you're doing everything right. I mean, you could be on the right medication, doing all the right things, and then all of a sudden you're depressed, or you're wanting to spend all your money, or a combination of the both.
No, this happens, and it's just, and it's if you have anyone out there who has loved ones with bipolar disorder, it's just, this is not an easy thing.
Yeah, and it's definitely not something that, I mean, and this was something too that after I'd come back from being AWOL, I remember it was actually the commanding general, General McWillie, I believe is his name, and he said, don't give me this bipolar bullshit, Vaughn. I want to know why you went to Argentina. And I mean, he was very explicit, said that from my whole command team. And I mean, to hear those words come out of my commander's mouth, I mean, it's like, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, first of all, bipolar is not bullshit. And, if you can't recognize even from the beginning there that this could be the whole reason why I did what I did, and really is a large part of the reason why I did what I did, then really there's no further point of trying to express myself. I just pretty much shut down. because I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to say anything. I mean, anything I do say here would just be used against me further anyway.
And this is CG?
This is the CG, yeah.
So this is the top at Fort Riley.
Top brass is like a 2 or 3 star general.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I would say a piece of this puzzle is to say if an officer is treated this way, imagine how a sergeant or a private is treated.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I've heard similar things over and over again of serious mental health issues being written off, and it's just cruel.
Yeah.
That's the only word for it.
Well, because, you have to think too, I mean, these people is, even by, people that don't agree with what I did and all of a sudden, you would at least agree that, troops should be treated with care, that troops should be, allowed better freedoms, really, if anything, than our own. I mean, we should be looking after people that are so bravely signing up to defend our country, and then yet when they have something that fails them, then we fail them. As a country, we fail these soldiers, and that are really struggling and needing assistance. And I think it's trying to get better. I know the Army is trying to get better at that, but I don't think I still have found the right situation. Just knowing from the people that I know that are still in, in their own experiences and things that I've heard from people that are in, I have yet to find a single person really in today's Army that is like, very like I'm for what's going on, and I fully support the mission, because there's a lot of disillusionment that goes on as you start becoming increasingly aware of our mission and what we're doing. And I think, from most, there's pretty much a foreign policy consensus that, our strategy in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Yemen has failed. Yeah. And it's not producing any real safety. As a matter of fact, it seems to be making matters worse, for large swaths of the world's population.
Well, one of the things in your case was after that, you're rebuilding your life, and then you get that notice in the mail. Yeah. And what the Army, what they decided to use was called a recoupment.
Correct.
They wanted him to pay back the cost of his West Point education, which was about $200,000.
It was a principal amount of $203,000, but with interest, that accrued to about $265,000 that I owed. And that was roughly 2015, maybe 16 that I got that notice.
So at this point, you're trying to rebuild your life. You're while having serious mental health issues, while having, let's be frank, a really challenging resume to explain. This is not the typical Army officer who's done 10 years or 20 years.
You come and have some like concrete references and all that.
This is a very tricky situation, and now you're being leveled with this kind of debt. So we, of course, have to go back to the legal proceedings. And one of the things that I was so appreciative of was the congressman who gave you your appointment, Tom Cole, later was the one who went to bat for us here.
Absolutely.
And,
which is rare for a Republican, I would say.
That's what made it so extraordinary. And, I'm pretty political and not a Republican, but I have to say Cole, although I always have a soft spot in my heart for him in this case, because he went to bat. And at the end, our packet to contest this, and we ended up having to go through multiple channels. If I remember right, was the Board of Corrections Military Records is what we ended up going with, I think.
I believe that was the initial step.
So we had to get them to change some of the characterization of a discharge was to then be able to get the recoupment taken off. Cole, if I recall right, he actually walked it over to the board. And that kind of level of attention made a big difference here. But throughout this, you had now several years of your life being in this very
flux state, and also a very punitive state. Like I felt and
they were garnishing your paychecks.
Well, they were going to, yes. I mean, they were going to garnish my paycheck at about 15% gross. And the only way to protect against that, I ultimately filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy. And, I don't care. I'll tell anybody, but I had to ultimately file Chapter 13 just to protect myself, because they were going to be garnishing. And thankfully, I had a high-paying job. I was at that point working as an underwriting assistant for a big Berkshire Hathaway insurance carrier. It treated me very nicely. But I, throughout that experience, it was challenging. Yeah.
So looking at this whole thing, you've been through a whole lot. When one, I have to say that I have just a deep admiration for you. That throughout this, you've worked hard to be an ethical person, to find ways to engage with this process and this system, and to follow your heart and conscience. And I think that's a really important piece of it. How would you say these experiences have shaped you, who you are today?
I'm definitely I would say a lot more empathetic with people's plights, and recognizing that it could easily just be me as the guy next to me that ends up as the person that needs help next. We all have our struggles, we all have our cross to bear, so to speak, in life, and this for me has shaped who I am ultimately. I mean, I try not to shy away from these experiences because I think people can definitely learn from them. I definitely learned a lot about what I'm willing to accept and what I'm willing to have energy-wise around in my life. And I go very proactively now to try to only be around healthy individuals that are going to add to my spirit and add to the development of a safer, more peaceful, and just world.
And as far as how is it, as far as your perspective on what it means to be an American at this point in time, how is that?
Well, I think I definitely want Americans to feel like they can take pride in their country, but I think we are reaching a certain point where taking pride in your country does not necessarily mean you have to ascribe to the same ideals and values as the person next to you. And I think, there's another version of our history that shows that this really is a melting pot of cultures. And this is one of the few countries on earth where you can really, if you try at least, to understand your neighbor's perspective, whether they be Muslim, whether they be gay, whether they be, whatever group, you should be able to not only tolerate but celebrate that diversity and celebrate the people around you, because in my opinion the soldiers that have died fighting for our freedom is exactly what that freedom means. Exactly that. It's that ability to be who you are authentically and not have to answer anybody else, as long as you're not hurting anyone else or doing any other harm to anyone else around you. So I really think that if we say Americans, we really do say we value this freedom, then we need to be challenging this current status quo and the new normal, so to speak. And we need to be holding truth to power, and instead of holding, right now we've got a man in the office that doesn't know truth if it hit him in the butt. So I mean, it's hard to see our country, falling for a bunch of lies. But I'm hoping that through this and getting beyond Trump, post-Trump, I think we might have a better world. We might have a better shot at people waking up and taking more interest in things like politics and understanding where they play as a role in their day-to-day life.
That's one thing I've been really struck by. Being back in Lawton today, I was just down here a couple weeks ago for the protest of the plans to house refugee children at Fort Sill. And at that protest I was at a couple weeks back, there were hundreds of people. We just had I didn't get to go to one last weekend, but hundreds again. It gives me so much hope that people are pushing back, that there is a desire to speak out and to engage. And so, that gives me a lot of hope. But I also think, part of the reason why I wanted to have you on this webcast, one is just fun to get to talk and catch up, but also I really felt like that your story was a powerful one as an example of finding creative ways to be true to yourself and also to your values. And even to me, what I find so striking is even in the moment when you were not in your right mind, when you were in that manic state and you took off for Argentina, so many other people in similar states killed themselves. They killed someone else. They hurt other people. You instead went for a trip. At the end of the day, to me that gives me a lot of hope that all of us are at times of our lives not in the best state of things. We often, but the question is, even in those moments, are we going to look for a choice that's life affirming, that's not going to hurt anyone else, or are we going to hurt other people? And so I guess I would also say that that's, to me, a really important part of your story, and I really hope there's more others like you who have had to make very difficult decisions and maybe not always great choices, but they've done their best. And I think that's a really, really important thing.
And I think a lot of it is about finding the silver lining and focusing on the positive aspects of any situation. And even when you're down in the dumps, recognizing that there's always a way out, there's always a brighter future and something that you can strive for, and to never lose sight of curiosity. That's something that I try to tell myself a lot if I'm ever feeling suicidal, which I have battled with those thoughts. But I think for anyone battling with pressure, suicide, things like that, it's definitely something that I know as at least a good coping mechanism for me is just trying to remember that this too shall pass. everything's in flux. Everything's always ever changing, ever evolving moment of being present.
Yeah.
You know, it's crucial, and I think meditation helps with that. I think, you know, the things that I was seeking in large part in Argentina when I took off was what I needed to be doing all along, which was, you know, meditating, focusing on my mental health, and trying to, you know, be the best me every day that I can.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you brought up meditation. We'll kind of maybe this kind of a place we'll kind of get towards wrapping this up. But I was thinking about this webcast. We are the Objector.Church. We're a religious humanist community, so we're seeking to find the good parts of religion, the sense of identity, purpose, meaning, ethics, all that, but doing so from a universalist humanist standpoint, and borrowing from traditions as needed, but really not being tunnel vision, which is unfortunately the kind of religion I grew up in. And there's good parts of it, but a lot of it is tunnel vision.
Absolutely agreed. I grew up in a very similar household, you know, and so I think that you know, getting beyond that and understanding that, you know, religion can pervert spirituality, and if you let too much dogma get in the way of real spiritual work and putting in the effort of being loving, of that true agape love that you know, people talk about. The only way to really get to that is to, you know, do a lot of things that we were talking about here, which is, you know, trying to understand your neighbor and trying to understand, you know, really, instead of sympathize, empathize, you know, and not always looking at down on people from a position of authority or judgmental perspective, which is where a lot of, unfortunately, you know, supposed Christ followers fall guilty of, which is, and they get on their high horse and they think that they're somehow above or better than these other people, you know, that continue to sin. So, you know, but we're all sinners and we all fall short of the glory of God, and that's biblical. So I don't, you know, I don't know how it gets perverted that way and used in the wrong way is beyond me. But, you know, I know to me that, you know, that the true message of God, I think, would resonate more with even atheists than it does even with so-called Christians. And I think that's also biblical, and there's references to that Christ himself has made, that, you know, not everyone who calls out my name.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate you opening up so much. I know this wasn't easy, but what you shared, I think, is a really important story, and I'm just hoping we'll spark more conversation. And I'll mention for any of you watching, we have been pre-recording these lately, just a little bit easier logistically. But if you want to join the conversation, if you have questions to ask Mac, we'll probably be having this up online probably later tonight, Tuesday evening. But if you have questions, you can post them on Facebook, and if he's free, he can be there.
I'll absolutely be able to answer any questions anyone has. I'm pretty much an open book, so I always like sharing my story, and I think this is a great outlet to do that. I'm honored to be on your webcast.
Well, thank you. Well, and hopefully we'll have you again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Would love to. Thanks, James.